The studio of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert glowed under the bright stage lights, the audience erupting in applause, eager for an evening of laughter. Millions tuned in from their screens as two prominent figures took their seats, Stephen Colbert and Karoline Leavitt. But no one could have predicted what was about to unfold. Before we dive into this intense exchange, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss a story. Colbert, with his trademark confident smirk, settled into the host chair, his eyes gleaming with sharp wit. A master of satire, he had spent decades turning political issues into biting comedy. Opposite him sat Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history. With her striking platinum blonde hair and piercing gaze, she was ready for battle, a fierce defender of the Trump administration and conservative Gen Z movement. Colbert kicked things off with a playful jab, his tone light but laced with intent. Karoline, are you here to defend Trump or to teach me how to make TikToks for your generation? Laughter roared through the crowd, applause breaking out. But Leavitt didn't flinch. She leaned forward, flashed a cool smile, and fired back without hesitation. I'm here to speak the truth, Stephen. Something you might not have tried after 2 decades of turning everything into a punchline. The laughter died instantly, replaced by hushed murmurs. Colbert hadn't expected such a swift counterpunch. The atmosphere shifted from light-hearted banter to something much more intense. Colbert recovered quickly, his signature smirk returning as he leaned forward, hands clasped on the desk. The truth, huh? Tell me. Karoline, has satire ever changed the world? Or do you think only your White House speeches can do that? A few chuckles scattered through the audience, but Leavitt remained unfazed. Sitting up straight, arms crossed, she met his gaze head-on. Satire, she began, her voice calm but cutting, is just an excuse to dodge responsibility. You mock everything, politics, people, even serious issues, but what have you actually built? Your audience laughs, goes home, and nothing changes. Meanwhile, I stand before the press every day, answering real questions, giving real answers, and defending what I believe in. A faint smattering of applause broke out from one corner of the room, but most of the audience remained silent, waiting for Colbert's next move. He let out a half-chuckle, trying to steer the moment back into his comfort zone. Laughter is my weapon, he countered. I expose the truths people like you try to hide, the failed policies, the empty promises. I don't need a podium to challenge those in power. I do it right here every night with millions watching. The crowd erupted again in cheers, his usual fans rallying behind him. But Leavitt wasn't finished. She tilted her head slightly, offering a thin, knowing smile. Really, Stephen? She asked, her tone both challenging and mocking. What have you actually changed, besides making people laugh for 30 seconds? You claim to expose the truth, but all I see is you tossing cheap jokes at people trying to do real work. I battle the press, Congress, the world, to defend what I believe in. And you? You sit here, safe in the studio, making money by tearing others down. The audience stirred, shifting in their seats. Some exchanged uncertain glances. The energy in the room had shifted. Colbert's smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for those paying attention to notice. He tapped his fingers on the desk, a familiar habit when he was searching for a response. Karoline, he said, his tone still laced with humor, but now with a sharper edge, you talk as if I'm the enemy of truth, but I'm just a storyteller. What about you? What story do you tell behind that podium? Leavitt took a deep breath, uncrossing her arms, her gaze never wavering. Fine, Stephen, she said, her voice steady. You want a story? Here's one, not to make you laugh, but to make you understand. The audience leaned in. Even Colbert hesitated, unsure whether to crack a joke or let her continue. There was a guy I worked with, she began, voice slow and deliberate. His name was Jake. He wasn't in front of the cameras, not a spokesperson, just one of the quiet workers making sure everything ran smoothly. He believed in what we were building. But then one day, your show, or a show like yours, changed everything. Colbert blinked, caught slightly off guard. You ran a segment on our campaign. Called us fanatics. Trump's puppets. The audience laughed, like they always do. But Jake, He became the punchline. Someone filmed him working backstage, added captions, turned him into a viral joke. He wasn't famous, Stephen. He didn't have thousands of followers to defend him. And suddenly, the whole world knew him as a fool. The silence in the room was deafening. Colbert shifted in his seat, the flicker of unease unmistakable. "And then what?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. Leavitt didn't let him steer the conversation. After that video, Jake lost his job. Not because he did anything wrong, but because the public pressure was too much. He told me he felt like the world had turned on him. All because of a joke he never signed up for. The air in the studio felt heavier. Even Colbert's most devoted fans weren't laughing. "But here's the difference, Stephen," Leavitt continued, voice now filled with a quiet strength. "Jake didn't give up. He came back, not for attention, not for applause, but because he believed in something bigger than himself. Real success isn't about fleeting laughs. It's about building something lasting. People like Jake are the reason I do what I do." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the audience. Then her gaze locked back onto Colbert. "And you, Stephen, you make a living turning people like Jake into punchlines. Then you forget them when the stage lights go out. You call that storytelling? I call it sabotage." The crowd sat motionless, eyes darting between the two. Even Colbert, for the first time, seemed at a loss. He took a breath, searching for a way to turn the moment back in his favor. "Karoline," he finally said, voice softer, "I don't target individuals like that. I go after the system, the people in power, like you and your boss. That's not sabotage. That's questioning." She didn't hesitate. "This isn't about jokes, Stephen. This is real life. You think you're challenging the system, but I've seen the fallout of what you call comedy, and I'm here to tell you it's not harmless." Colbert exhaled slowly, gripping the desk. The audience's usual laughter was absent. The balance in the room had shifted. For the first time, Stephen Colbert wasn't just the one throwing the punches. He was on the receiving end. Stephen Colbert sat at his desk, his usual confidence shaken. The papers on his desk were forgotten, resting haphazardly on his lap. He looked up at Karoline Leavitt, his eyes no longer filled with sarcasm, but with something deeper. Perhaps confusion, perhaps acknowledgement. He opened his mouth, but for the first time in his career, no quip emerged, no rebuttal spoken. He simply sat there, silent, at a loss for words. Leavitt sat back, her hands crossed, her face calm, though her eyes still burned with intensity. She didn't need to say more. Her question, her argument, had done what no one had expected. It had rendered Stephen Colbert, the master of words, completely speechless. The room held its breath, the weight of the moment settling in. A woman in the front row whispered to her friend. She just knocked him out on his own turf. Though faint, the whisper rang through the silent studio like a proclamation. Colbert took a deep breath, his hands tightening slightly as if grasping for stability. "Karoline," he began, but his voice cracked, barely audible. He stopped, looking down at his hands, before lifting his gaze once more. The eyes that met Leavitt's weren't those of a confident host, but of someone confronting an unexpected truth. Leavitt didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just looked at him, her gaze steady, as if silently saying, "I've spoken my piece. Now it's your turn." The audience was motionless, watching as though they were ringside at a championship fight, where the knockout blow had just landed, but the match wasn't quite over. Colbert took another deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling, as if shaking off the weight of the moment. When he lifted his head again, his eyes were no longer vacant, but sparking with a new resolve. He leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. His voice was shaky at first, but grew steadier. "Karoline, you're good, really good. I've got to admit, you just silenced me, something not many have done in 20 years. A small, genuine laugh escaped him, devoid of sarcasm. The audience responded with scattered chuckles, sensing the shift in tone. "But I feel like I need to speak up for my perspective, my legitimacy, don't I?" Leavitt raised an eyebrow but didn't reply. Her eyes silently dared him. "Go ahead. Try." Colbert pressed on, his voice strengthening, though still carrying the tremor of someone pushed to their limit. "You're right about one thing. Caroline, I don't always think about the people who get me here. My team, the writers, the crew, they're the backbone of this show. Maybe I've taken that for granted. I'm not perfect. I'll own that. A few soft claps rose from the audience, like a small wave of encouragement. But Colbert wasn't finished. He leaned in closer, his eyes sharpening, as if rediscovering a part of himself. "But you're wrong about one thing," he said, his tone carrying a renewed defiance. "You say I hide behind laughter, that I don't take responsibility. I disagree. I've spent my career questioning people in power, people like you and your boss. I don't just make people laugh. Caroline, I make them think. I make them doubt. I make them see the world in ways they hadn't considered. That's not cowardice. That's how I fight." The audience stirred, applause growing louder, as if sensing Colbert was clawing his way back. He pointed at Leavitt, his voice rising with conviction. "What about you, Caroline? You talk about responsibility and standing up for what you believe in, but you're loyal to a man millions in this country don't trust, a man accused of lying, cheating, and putting himself above everything else. Is that responsibility, or is it blindness? You say I hide behind laughter, but are you hiding behind loyalty?" A murmur rippled through the audience. Some nodded in agreement. Others turned their gaze toward Leavitt, awaiting her response. This was his strongest count of the night, his final push to turn the tide. The cameras panned to Leavitt's face. For the first time that night, she smiled, not a triumphant grin, but a knowing, steady smile. She leaned forward, her voice unwavering. "I've been waiting for you to ask that, Stephen." She paused, letting the moment breathe, before continuing. "I'm loyal to what I believe is right, not just to a person, but to a vision for this country. You might not agree with me, with my boss, or with the millions who support us, but at least I don't hide behind anything. I stand in front of the world every day. No script, no friendly audience. And I say what I believe, whether I'm hated, criticized, or mocked by people like you. That's the difference between us. You might make people think, Stephen, but I make people act." Her words struck deep. The studio was silent, the weight of her statement settling over everyone. Colbert sat back, his eyes no longer defiant, but carrying something else, a hint of reluctant respect. He nodded, a small gesture of concession. "You're really tough, Caroline," he said, his tone softer now. "I don't know what to say to that. Maybe you're right. Partly. But I still believe in what I do." Leavitt nodded back, saying nothing more, as if she didn't need to. She had made her point, and everyone in the studio felt it. The applause started slowly, then grew louder, not just for one or the other, but for both. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about witnessing a moment of real debate, of genuine confrontation and reflection. Colbert looked at the audience, his smile returning, but with a different shade, not one of arrogance, but of humility. He raised a hand to calm the room. "Okay, I think we just had a real moment here. She doesn't mess around, folks." Leavitt gave a small smile, the first sign of warmth that night, but her eyes remained resolute. She didn't need to say more. She had already won, not by defeating Colbert, but by forcing him to look inward. As the cameras panned across their faces, the energy in the room had shifted. It was no longer about a battle of words, but about something deeper, a lesson in responsibility, loyalty, and the power of belief. When Colbert finally extended his hand, Leavitt shook it, a firm handshake, filled with mutual respect. The audience erupted into applause, not for a victor, not for a loser, but for something real. And as Leavitt walked off the stage, confidence undiminished, Colbert watched her go, shaking his head with admiration. He turned to the audience. "All right, I think I need a commercial break after that." The show's outro music played, but the moment lingered. In the days to come, the world would debate who won. But perhaps the real victory was in the conversation itself, a clash of ideals that neither crushed nor yielded, but instead made everyone, Colbert included, pause and think.